All right, so thanks for this quick introduction in our first Asai Tech Night. So thanks for that. So I think if I'm good audible, I think we can just get started. So my presentation, I will start with quick, silly questions for all of the audience that we have right here. So the first silly question will be, how many applications of any kind did you use day to day? So honestly, from my experience, it depends on the day. If you are a software engineer or if you anybody else, you can use like tens or of hundreds of the applications, and each of that application has under the hood his own environment variables, configs, settings, and other stuff like that. So let's go to the second silly question. So the second silly question is about how many components, like software components in that meaning, do you need to watch your favorite episode of your favorite series? So yeah, it's a bit hard question to answer, I think. But based on the knowledge that we have, in case of, for example, Netflix, it's around like 500 or more services, right? Just to watch this one episode of that series. So 500 services, each of them has his own environment variables, settings, configs, and other stuff like that, right? So it's a bit complex, I think, solution to improve or to handle, I think. Another silly question is, maybe do you recognize this one? Anyone? Or maybe this one? So for someone, to summarize it, for someone who was under the ice for like 10 years, those two big applications has problems with sending the notifications to the users. So they was sending the notification on test environment to the production environment. So another question is, do you want to know how to prevent such accidents? I guess you want to know it because you are here. So that's my guess. So that's why I prepared, and I will be presenting today the presentation about how we can manage the front-end configuration, or maybe not just the front-end, but in general, the front-end configuration. But before I will go to the real content of the presentation, I just want to quickly introduce myself. So hi everyone, I am Maciej. Currently I am in position of head of the frontend in Asaisoft. From my developer experience, I was working as a front-end developer for like 7 or 8 years from now. And also I was involved in over than 25 or 30 end-to-end deployments from like dev environment to the prod environment. So I think I can share that knowledge today. That's my guess. So yeah, let's jump to the real content of that presentation. So I know that it's like late afternoon, Wednesday, but you need to use the imagination. I need to use it as well. So let's imagine that all of the people here are the front-end developers. All of the people here is working under the one company, under the one project. Okay? So we are just a team of front-end developers. So we just, the new client just knocked our door, and this new client just give us a new project to work on. All right? So we have like new client, new project. All of us are involved inside of it. So let's go through some framework to do not worry about how to handle the things, because we need to separate this presentation in some parts. So we will be separating that presentation into the 4 parts. So the first part will be to review the existing state of the problem. All right? So this is the first step. The second step, we will need to define a problem, because if the client just comes up to the software house, he always has a problem to resolve. So we'll be defining the problem, also gathering some informations, requirements, and other stuff like that. The third step will be develop alternative solutions. So that step is just for the research and development. So this is the longest step that we need to do in that presentation. And on the end of the presentation, we will have we'll need to evaluate the outcome from that solution. So to summarize, we have like the new project, we have the new team, which we just created. The client has a problem, and we need to resolve the problem. All right? So let's go through that framework. So we'll be right now reviewing the existing state of the problem, of the project. So as you can see, maybe I will summarize it at the beginning. So client has an existing application, which is written in React. It doesn't matter for us, really. So client has an existing application. He has like existing deployment, pipelines, builds, and other stuff like that. So all of that is like existing right now. The second thing is project has existing architecture. So all of that is set up and prepared to do. The next thing is like project is integrated with the 3 micro frontends. The micro frontends in that meaning is just embedded application inside of other frontend application. Doesn't matter for us, but matter is like for each of that micro frontend we have like 2 or 3 unique variables to set up to get that working. Another thing is project is like 3 third-party embedded components for chat, for payments, and for the maps. So let's go to the next step of reviewing the existing state. So also, project has 7 different feature flags. So the feature flags are hard-coded into the environment. Okay. The next item is that project has dependencies in 5 different microservices URLs. So it's like just a dependency inside of the environment variable. Okay. So this is like a URL to fetch. All right. Also, time to build and deploy a project is about like 30 to 40 minutes. Let's do that. That it is like a 1 hour to deploy and build the whole project. Okay. And right now, the client has an implemented solution that for each of the environment, we have a separate build. Okay. So this is a bit of complex project, I think. Because the one point is that this is not a project from scratch, so we need to know the code, we need to know everything about that project, okay? So the client has like existing project and we need to solve the issue. So the next question is, what is the issue that the client has, all right? So I will be going through those 3 points, the first 3 points that we have here. And I will be giving you a business test case or business case for that usage. So the first bullet point is about that client wants to have a large number of the sandbox environments. You can ask me what is the sandbox environment. So the sandbox environment is really the environment that you can use on your own. It is a test environment that you can use, and it is like cut it off from other environments. Okay. And the business case behind that we have is, you can imagine that the client has a potential client that he is like going to the dinner with, right? And he is like telling him that, all right, I can set up for you a sandbox environment, and you can use it just before you end up your coffee that you are drinking right now. So this is the business case behind it. Also, the second point, it's somehow connected to the first one because client wants to decrease the time to build and deploy the project. So this is like connected. Also, the third point is that client wants to somehow dynamically like set up or change the environment variables. So we can imagine that client on like Friday wants to have a logo as a cat, but on the Monday he wants a logo as a dog, all right? And he wants to define it manually or somewhere else. And also the last point is like every software house client has that point, so he wants to be done at cheap, fast, and well, right? So we are quite quick going through those 2 first steps. So right now we will be jumping in to develop alternative solutions, so it will be our part for like research and development, okay? So because we are quite a new team as a front-end developers, I will be making some of the introduction, how the front-end like project is built up, deployed, and released. So I will be quickly just going through how we are doing it like on common way. So the first thing to build and deploy the front-end applications is that you need to have your code. Okay, so you have the code ready to be used. On your local, everything is working as always. So you are ready to be like build it up. So what is the build meaning in case of the front-end application? So in case of the front-end application, the build meaning that we are like transpiling and we are preparing the code that we written to be understandable in case of the browser, right? Because all of the front-end applications are like running on the browser, for example, right? In the common use case. So we have that project build it up. So right now we are ready to be like release it, right? So what release is meaning in case of the front-end application? So if we have that code that is like transpiled and built, right now we can just push it somewhere so the client can just access it. So it doesn't matter really where we will be pushing it, but somewhere that the client can just access it, right? So client just typed the domain name and our project just came up on it. And the last point, and probably the most important, is the run stage. So whenever the client just typing that domain, we need to run the application, okay? That code that we built, that code that we prepared and release it. Okay, so the next step into the introduction is like, what is the application, what is the front-end application environment? Okay, so we can separate it into the two ways. So on the right side, so the build environment and the run environment on the left side. So you can imagine that it is like the separation between them, because the run environment is totally on the client side, right? Because we are running it on the browser. On the right side, we have a build environment. So in most of the cases, it's just the Docker image or Docker container that we are building up the code, and we are preparing the code to be built. All right. On the left side, we have like desktop or mobile browser or Electron app or anything else that can run the front-end code. Also, under the run environment, we have like access to any data that browser can deliver us. So for example, we have access to the location, to the cookies, third-party cookies, local storage, session storage, anything like that, okay? So that's the way. All right, one more thing. If we are making that separation between the run and build environment, so I need to say it, there is no easy way to like access the build environment variables, for example, inside of the run environment. We need to always like take those variables from the build environment and like insert it inside of this builded version of the code. All right, so there is no easy way to pass the variables from two ways like that. Okay, so you can ask the question: Do we have an access to any front-end environment variable in any front-end application? So yeah, we don't have it. Always we need to like insert it on the build level. So we never had an access to, for example, browser. We have an access to the browser, but we don't have an access to anything under the browser. So we are like scoped only to the browser on the client side. All right. So another question is: have you even tried or need to just deploy the front-end application to the multiple environments? So we can imagine that we have like 3 environments, like dev, test, and prod, and you need to like deploy it to those environments. So in my case, I try to do that many times, and there is like always something that is like not working, or we have some problems with that, or we don't know how to do that in the proper way. So the introduction are done. So right now we are ready to like develop this solution, right? remember that what we need to do is to solve the client issue, all right? So we need to solve all the things that we have under the define a problem state. So let's go through the default case in case of the environment variables for the front-end application. So in default case, it's a very easy stuff. So for default case, we are creating an environment file. After that, we are storing the variables. We are choosing the right environment. We are using the right environment variables, and we are like calling some process.env. This is the case of the, for example, React application, right? So this is like seems to be easy. So what we need to do if we have like multiple environments? So again, we need to create like 3 files. We need to store the variables in those files. We need to choose again, use that variables, and calling the right process.env based on the node env that we have in the application. Okay, so that's easy, but it's like not looking as good as expected, I think. So that's why to solve that issue, we need to define the ideal workflow that we need to cover, all right? Because I don't want to just go back to this defining a problem state, and I will be just checking that if that's all is okay in our solution. So that's why we need to define our ideal flow for that. So the first point that we need to cover is that our solution that we will be developing to solve that issue does not require a rebuild, all right? So we don't want to rebuild an application if we change the environment or we change the environment variable somehow, all right? The other thing is that because we don't know that code, because this is like existing project, we don't know to make like a lot of changes inside of the code. So this is the second point. The next point is that we need to allow synchronously access to the environment variables. So what that means? So you can imagine that if you are building up the application and you will be storing the environment variables somewhere asynchronously, so in some third-party services or something like that, you always need to fetch them, all right? And this is like taking probably not a lot of time, but sometime we need to wait till that environment variables will be fetched from the third-party services. So we don't need to do that in that case. So another point is like this is based on the defining a problem from the client. So this is like based on the requirements from the client that we need to be able to dynamically change the variables. So in case of that problem, it is like the client wants to change some logo, as I mentioned previously, and he wants to set it like dynamically. So he just provide a URL to the image, and we need to insert it inside of the application. So this is like the easy case for that point. All right. Also, we need to be like easy to integrate with the current workflow because again, it is like existing application, it is working, but it is working like building and deploying it slowly. So we don't want to make a lot of changes into the current workflow that client have. And the last and probably the most important one is that we want to separate the build, the release, and the run stage. So even in the current client solution, those two, like build and release, is in the one step, and run step is it is like separated. So even in current solution, it's like separated the run stage, but build and release, it's in the one step. Okay, so that's like our ideal workflow. So let's make some separation between how we can deliver the front-end environment variables. So this is like based on the pretty much Googling, really. So I just found 2 possible ways of doing that. At least I just found it. So the first alternative is that we are making the environment-specific build. So this is again like right now in production because the client has like implemented that, and this is like not acceptable solution from the client perspective. All right. So another way of doing it is like build once and deploy everywhere. So we are building our code just once, and after that we are deploying it everywhere. So we are making some of the like decorator pattern on the build because we are building it, decorating it with the config and the settings, and later we can deploy it like just everywhere. Okay. So right now, let's quickly go through those like things that we discover from the internet. So the first will be the environment-specific build. So as I mentioned, it is like already implemented by the client, and also it is like not acceptable right now from the client perspective. So again, we have the code, we have the config, we make the build, we really sync it, and we can run it, all right? And we need to do that for each of the environment that we can have. And because of that we will be having a lot of sandbox environments, it is like not acceptable at all for that client. So let's quickly go through that ideal workflow. So as you can see, it's like 2 big red points here. So this solution requires a rebuild after every environment change or anything like that. And also we are not separating the build and release stages. So we cannot decrease the time to build that application because we need to build it every time, like run the unit test cases, end-to-end test cases, and other stuff like that. So we need to like build it every time for every of the environment. So let's go through the second option that we have, the second alternative that we have. So the second option is like build once, deploy and everywhere. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have the code, we're building the code. After we build the code, so it is like a strong separation between them. We are decorating the code or the build that we just have into the config or into the environment variables, all right? So we are replacing them, we are changing them, or we are just setting up them. And after that, after we like choose which config we need to decorate that build with, we can just release it and run everywhere as at the top of the slide. So inside of this build once, deploy everywhere, we have like 3 alternatives that I found, and I would like to just go through them to check if maybe those alternatives will solve our issue. So the first alternative is to fetch environment variables like asynchronously from the third party or from the database. Okay, so this is like something that I mentioned at the previous slides. So this is like not good at all for us because again we have like 2 red dots here. So it is like not allow us to synchronously access the environment variables, so it's like not that good as expected. And also we are not separating the build and the release stage, okay? Because we are still have that one environment variables because we need to define from where we are fetching those variables, okay? So the next alternative that we have is to store all of the environment variables into the builded version of the code. So you can imagine that we have like the code, okay? We are like defining everything inside of our React application. We are bundling it together, and after that we are, for example, just choosing the right environment based on the domain or based on the DNS or based on the, I don't know, anything, right? So there is a logic behind it. But yeah, let's go through the ideal workflow. So as you can see, 2 red dots, 3 orange one. So it's not a good solution, I think. So the first is that we need to rebuild the application after we change something. So it's like not good for us. Client has like implemented that solution already. And also we don't have like ability to dynamically change the variables. Also, it's not that like it's not separating the build release because all we have inside of the code in the build code. So also this is not the greatest solution that we can have. So let's go to the last alternative. So the last alternative is to like store the placeholder environment variables and just replace them after we build the code, before the serving the files or before after we build the code. So what is the example for that? So we can imagine that we are like building our application, all right? We are just setting some unique environment variables or just the placeholder values for that variables. And after that code is built up, we have like a script that will be replacing them before the build. So we have like building step, and after that we are decorating the variables, and after that we can deploy it whatever we want. So that sounds like a plan. It's probably the best solution that we can use, because again we are separating the build and the release, so we can reuse that build. Also, it does not require a rebuild every time, because we are decorating the build before the deployment and not on the build step. But again, it's not like covering everything, right? Ability to dynamically change the variables, it is, but it is not that easy that it looks like, I think. So also, this is not a greatest solution that we can have, I think. So that's like perfect view of that situation. So we are like finding some perfect solution. After that, we are like thinking about it, and the problems are just behind our back. So as a software engineer, that problem is like every time in the morning, I think. So again, we will be going back to defining a problem to just have a knowledge for the previous alternatives that we have. So again, none of that 3 bullet points was even resolved by those alternatives. So in every case, we are not resolving all of them. We are resolving part of them or none of them. All right? So that's why, again, as a software engineer, we need to have a custom solution for that. So let me introduce what I just did on that diagram. So again, we are inside of the research and development step. So we are like researching it. The researching items are not resolving our problem, so we need to resolve it on our own. So let's go through that weird diagram that I created. So as you can see, we have like a separation between the build phase and between the deploy phase. So those items are like separated entirely, so we are not connecting them anywhere. So let's quickly go through the build phase. So let's like go through the problem and the resolve of the problem from the beginning. So the first item that we need to do to resolve the client issue is to prepare the code. So the first item to do in the preparing the code is to separate static and dynamic environment variables. So for what we are doing it? So because the dynamic environment variables will maybe be changed by the client under the run stage of the project, right? So client wants to change something, and he wants to do that without making a deployment for it, okay? So we need to separate those environment variables somehow. So we are like we having a list of static environment variables and dynamic environment variables. So after that, we will need to make some change in the naming convention, I think, because we need to change the dynamic environment variables into the feature flags. So you can ask me, what is the feature flags? So the feature flags are just like flags that can be changed under the run stage of the project. So if client wants to change something, he just go to some third-party services, enable or disable the flag, and this is like change it on our side, on our application side. So we need to do that. So we need to change those dynamic environment variables into the feature flags. Also, we need to use some third-party service or just have that feature flags under some I don't know, database or maybe some files or like anything else that, but not inside of our application. And after that, we will be using the placeholder values for the static environment variables. So we are like picking that option from the last alternative that I show. So we are just using the placeholder values for the static environment variables. And after that, the code preparation is done. Okay, so those 3 steps we need to make to get that done. So the next item is to build the code using the Docker container. So that step is already being done by the client, so it is like covered. We have a Docker container or Docker image that we can use, and this is okay. But we are adding one more step before we are going to the deploy phase. So we are just pushing that Docker image that we just created to some Docker hub or to some Artifactory or to somewhere that we can just, after the build, we can pull it out. Okay, so we are just pushing that container to some Docker hub. Okay, and that build phase is done. So, for example, if we'll be releasing something new in that application, we can just go through that step and give availability to the client that he can like deploy that specific build in the time that the client wants to deploy it, all right? So the build is ready, we can use it, we can pull it, we cannot change it because it's like inside of the Artifactory, for example, but we can just use it, all right? So the next stage of it is the deploy phase. So the deploy phase will be pretty much very easy, I think, but again, we need to prepare the deployment for it. So the first step to prepare a deployment, we need to pull that Docker image that we push it out into the build phase. So we are like defining a build ID or something like that, or build version for it, and we are pulling that up from the like private Docker registry or anything like that. After that, we need to set those static environment variables because we need to like decorate that Docker image that we just pull it out and decorate with those static environment variables, okay? And also, again, important thing that we need to also deliver the like URL or ID to that feature flag service that we are using, right? Because it's like a static environment variable. And after that, we can just grab that and deploy the code to the selected environment, all right? So this is our plan. I think it sounds good to me, at least. So let's go to the conclusion of that. So the first thing in conclusion is like evaluate the outcome. So we need to grab the defining a problem step, and we need to evaluate the outcome if all of that bullet points that we have is resolved by that. Okay? So the first bullet point, the deploy time decreased by 95%. So why it's like decreased so highly? Okay? Because we don't have the build phase under the deployment. So whenever the client wants to deploy something, he just grabbing that Docker container, he's like pushing it, deploying it, and that's it. We don't need to run the tests under each of the deployment, under each of the environment. The second is, right now we are like pretty much cloud native because we containerize the application. We're using some Docker Artifactory, Docker containers, and other stuff like that. We are pulling something from the Artifactory, so we are pretty much cloud native. And we are like delivering not the like awful builded version of JS code. We are delivering the containerized application. And this is like sounds good to me as well, I think. All right. So the last conclusion from that presentation is like, I just want you, if you are the software developer, I just want you to check how you are defining, how you are setuping, how you are configuring, how you are like declaring the environment variables or feature flags inside of your project. Even if that project is just a silly cut page, please check it. Because like remember that the config and the like setup of the application is like pretty much very important step, because even if we produce a great code and we just not set up properly the application, as those two applications of the beginning of the presentation just did, like it doesn't matter, right? We are not in the good state. And also remember that preventing is always better than fixing something in production, as those two applications just need to do. So the last conclusion is there is always a bigger fish, so please pay attention how you manage your applications. So yeah, I think that's it. So there is a time for Q&A. So I'm here to answer the question. Thanks.